Welcome to the Leadership and Love podcast. We will cover leadership, mindset, personal development, and sales and marketing. You will experience thought-provoking conversations with both nationally and internationally recognized leaders. Our goal is to inspire you and deliver actionable items that you can implement that are going to help you accelerate your growth. Get ready to discover the magic and the power when you lead with love. Today I have a very special guest, a lifelong friend, very dear friend, a mentor, and a very wise person just overall. So welcome to Laurette DeJulian, and I'd like to preface a little bit of an introduction for her. I think she brings so much to the table for a number of reasons. One, she was very successful for decades in the finance and banking industry, really kind of corporate America, if you will. And then she was also very successful helping her husband run their company that they sold those big batteries that go in like forklifts and those kinds of pieces of equipment. And then she became a spiritual teacher of sorts. She's actually been my spiritual mentor for the last 15 years, and my life is completely different because of it. And also, if all that isn't enough, she recently opened her own business as a specialty bread maker. And so she specializes in making these wonderful breads that people are lining up to get. So thank you very much for joining me. And truly, it's a pleasure. And thank you for taking the time.
Oh, I'm just really happy to be here and open to
Okay.
the conversation.
Cool. Yeah, and we're going to kind of let it go. I've got a couple starter questions to just kind of get the conversation going. So when you were growing up, who was somebody that was a leader in either leadership or love that you looked up to, and why?
Well, I thought about this question and I cannot think of a particular person more than my family dynamic. I was the daughter of two first-generation Americans. And so my grandparents on both sides were immigrants. And part of that storytelling of my family was to know how they came over, where they left from, and also being immigrants, they didn't expect anybody to do anything for them. So in that situation, consciously or unconsciously, I saw people being creative. In life, we decide either to be a victim of our circumstances or to say, okay, this is my circumstance. What am I going to do about it? So as these immigrants came over to the United States, they got busy creating the life that they wanted to live, not asking for special favors, not taking handouts. And I saw this very stoic and creative way of being. So when I was 13, I was placed in a program at school that was kind of a cutting edge. Now I'm 64, so this was back in the 70s. So there was a lot of progressive learning opportunities that came about. And this particular school that I went to was trying out a college system for young people, which meant at 13 years old, I was given a curriculum, but I didn't have to go to class every day. Just very similar to going to university. You go to class maybe 1 day or 2 days a week, you're given your assignments, you listen to the lectures, and then you organize your own time, and it's up to you to start managing your own time to pass the tests and to turn in the paperwork. So at 13 years old, I was put into an environment where I had to rely on myself. Nobody was going to, where were you at second period or where were you at third period? There were days where I only had 3 classes a week, and the rest of the time I had to schedule my own time and my own study time. I had to be on campus, but I had to, and the workload was pretty heavy because it was kind of college workload. I think that had a lot to do with me being able to be successful in university, but also in business, because nobody was there to tell me what to do. I had to have my own schedule, my own problem solving. So I think those things really formulated me. Plus, my father was in the military, and I was one of 5 children. And so it was all about telling the line. I had brothers, and as you know, Louie, being in the military. So when I got into banking, well, I first started my career in the oil field in Texas, which you didn't see a lot of women in the oil field in Texas in the 70s. I was in a engineering program, which you didn't see a lot of women in engineering either. And my first job, I sold downhole drill collars. Um, there are these big steel things that go down to drill for oil. And it was a tough, scrapple existence. And because of my upbringing with these tough immigrants, and coupled with my father being in the military, there was no crying in baseball. So I didn't really, when you're an immigrant, you really have to know who you are, because a lot of people are going to discriminate against you, and you have to have a lot of, as we say. And I carried that throughout my career. I didn't let people tell me who I was. I just had this knowing of who I was. And I think that was the biggest determinant to the things that I went on to do in my life.
That's fascinating. So you touched on something that I'm really, really fond of, and that's the topic of self-leadership. So what would your advice be to the listeners about how they can lead themselves? Because I think it's easy to lead others, right? It's easy to tell other people what to do or how to do it, but it's a real challenge to lead ourselves. So what would you suggest, or what would be your wisdom for our listeners on how to lead yourself? Especially since you had experience at such a young, tender age of leading
And
yourself.
yeah, so what we say is leadership, to be a leader, you need to have followers. You don't automatically get followers. You might get direct reports because of the organization and they assign them to you, but that doesn't mean they're going to follow you. They're going to actually, some of them might do their very best to, throw you off track. You have to recruit followers, and we recruit followers by being the person we want to be. And so the first thing I would say is, who do you want to be? A lot of people don't know who they want to be or why they want to be that person. So once you determine who you want to be and who you would like to work for and the qualities that you would like to have, if you were watching a movie of yourself, um, then you need to cultivate and become that person. Don't talk about becoming that person, but be that person that you feel good about. A lot of the things that we do as leaders, sometimes we don't feel good about the things that we do. And most of the things that we do out of insecurity sometimes that we don't like. So we really need to know who we are. And that's really key to leadership.
That's really some profound wisdom. I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't ever take the time to figure out who they want to be. I'd like to ask you something that I think is going to be very helpful. What advice would you give to women who are, and there's more and more women in the workplace and more women in business. You kind of came up, like you said, in a time when it wasn't popular to be a woman, especially in the fields that you were in. It's fascinating because I didn't know you sold like those big things that went into oil fields. But what would your advice be to women who are in the workplace leading?
Well, this might get me into some trouble but this is my opinion, right? I don't
Right.
expect anyone to give me a break because I'm a woman. I expect to be the best person for the job. And so in my past experience, I was put on teams of men that didn't necessarily want a woman on their team, but they didn't know me yet. I allowed them to get to know me. And I always dedicated my time to being the best at what I did. It wasn't about being a man or a woman. It was about being the best and most gifted. I was always upping my game to be the very best at what I did. And I became the secret weapon. I said, I am going to be your secret weapon. And so I learned most about the clients. I learned most about the buying decisions. I learned what the clients' pain points were. I studied the industry. I knew everything about the client that could possibly down to, we dealt with some corporations, but we also dealt with some closely held corporations. And so there were family dynamics and there was history behind. I knew everything there could possibly be. And I made myself the best at negotiating. And I also made myself easy to work with.
Wow. So did you come to that naturally, or did you kind of morph into that over time?
I had an epiphany. Um, I watched a lot of people struggle when I got on. I was a good student. I've always been a student, so I study the situation. Who's popular? Who's doing well? Why are they doing well? There weren't a lot of women around uh, in those days. It's changed now. But the women that I saw, I wasn't particularly proud of. They did a lot of complaining. They did a lot of arguing. They talked a lot about fairness. And I just made sure that I was such a valuable asset. Nobody ever wanted to lose me, nor did they want me to go to a competitor and compete against me. So I made myself the very best. I didn't focus on being a woman. That wasn't my problem. It might be someone else's problem, but I never allowed it to be a problem for me.
Yeah, you touched on something really important there, and that's 100% responsibility, right? Most of the world, men or women, they want to blame their life situation, that victimhood that you talked about, on somebody in the world, right? They're not, it's not working because of whatever they're doing, and it's really refreshing to hear you say that you just got busy being the best, right? You weren't worried about being male or female. You were just busy getting to be the best. I'd like you to talk now, if you could, about leadership and love. And you made this great transition out of corporate America into this place where now you teach people how to heal, how to love. You're a great service to people who are carrying some very heavy trauma and past life traumas and experiences. So can you talk a little bit about how you made that transition and what gave you the courage to do that?
Well, so there's a couple of things I'd like to say about. Through being a good leader, I learned to be present for the people that worked for me, really present. And so, when we own our own business or we're in a corporation, there's always a business plan. So I would invite my employees in every year and say, this is my business plan. Tell me where you fit in my business plan. Tell me your business plan and how it's going to sit inside my business plan. Tell me about your dreams and your aspirations and how we can work together so I can have my business plan and your business plan work together. So that's the first setting of expectations. And in that setting of expectations, I did a lot of listening. I was present to understand what that person valued, what made that person tick. And, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't work. But when it didn't work, I had a platform to sit down and say, remember when we got together and you told me that this was going to be your plan and how it fit in to my plan? You know, it's not working. So how can we work together to find where your business plan works? And so it's always about the individual. It was always about, don't you want to be happy in life? Is this fitting for you? And I helped a lot of people leave my industry and get into better situations for them instead of ever getting into this tenacious, me against you and you against me and let's. So that began the presence. And so what I've realized is um, How I am at business is how I am all the time. You and I have had long-standing relationship, and how I am with you and how I hopefully come across in this conversation is how we always talk together, right? I
Right.
only want one channel. And to have one channel, you really not need to know what drives you. And is it fear or is it love? And so this presence is a very important part of how I live in the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think that you're right. I think, Phil Jackson wrote a book called 11 Rings. And so for those of you that don't know, Laurie's out in the LA area and he coached the Chicago Bulls and then he went out to the Lakers and he's got 11 rings. And he wrote this book called 11 Rings. And much to your point about being present, he tells in the book about how when he was in Chicago, every year he would buy everybody on the team a book, but it wasn't the same book. He had been present with them enough, and he was kind of like the Zen master to begin with, but he had been present with enough with them that he knew which specific book to buy for each individual. So he didn't buy one book and give it to the whole team. He bought, 20, 30 books and gave each person on the team, not only the coaching staff, but the players, a book that like fishing or poker or something that they were specifically interested in. So I think your point about presence very, very important. And I think people, especially in the work environment, see that as some sort of kind of corporate exchange, if you will, right? Where we've got to only talk about business and we can't get involved or connected or know anything about the person. When you came to the realization that you had bigger calling, and it's really fascinating to me, having been in a relationship with you for the last 15 years where you've kind of been a very powerful mentor in my life. It's fascinating that I think you're absolutely right. You've been on one channel, one track, you've been being the same person. What would your advice be to people who are looking to go do something different than what they've done for decades, and how do they lead themselves to that, and how do they continue to maintain that love not only for themselves but for others in in that transition?
I would say that they need to get themselves in an environment to know what it is that they value. They need to sit down with a business coach or a mentor or somebody that's non-biased in their life that they can trust, a trusted advisor. And they need to sit down and decide what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what they value, what their gifts are, and how are they going to use their strengths, their values, and their gifts to create an environment where they're really enjoying themselves. So many people focus on money, and focusing on money is creates an attachment to money. When you have a lot of stuff, you got to get insurance for a lot of stuff because you're afraid of losing the stuff and you're always worried about losing the stuff. Or you're always worried, like, I can't leave this job. I'm so unhappy because I make so much money. So instead of being tied to the money, you need to follow your personal guide and really enjoy what you're doing. And when you enjoy what you're doing, we've heard this all, it seems so trite. Um, I'm a spiritual director and I'm busy. I'm a busy spiritual director. And it's because I love what I'm doing and I'm passionate about what I'm doing. Um, and I'm a lot more happy and balanced in my life. When you're in a corporate at the game that I was playing, sure, you're on the top of the pole. And guess who's at the bottom of the pole? A bunch of people that want your job. And so you worry about, maintaining being at the top of the pole, and it takes a lot of energy to be at the top of the pole. And also, you're responsible for a lot of things. So it takes a lot of stress. And after a while, to maintain being on the top of the pole, your life gets out of balance. Your relationships suffer, your health suffers, your just overall happiness suffers. And so you have to decide, is it worth getting sick over it? Is it worth putting my relationship or my relationship with my children, the time and the quality that I get to spend with them for money, you know.
So what gave you the courage to make the transition?
Well, now we're getting into some interesting area. Um, I have a very deep faith in a higher power. And I spent a lot of time following the voice of love. And it's never steered me wrong. Have I suffered? Yes, I have had some suffering, but I wouldn't have suffered as nearly as much without it. I don't focus on success at all because I focus on having experiences that bring me into a greater awareness of who I am as the creator, not the victim. And,
I, I,
and whatever you see that happens around me, whether it looks successful, I'm gonna tell a story. There once
sure.
was this there once was this Chinese farmer, and he had a horse. And one day he used the horse. This was back, before you had tractors and stuff. He had a horse that helped him, turn the fields and plant his seeds. And the horse ran away. And everybody in the village gathered around him and said, "Oh, this is really, really terrible. We feel so sorry that your only source of income has now run away. What are you going to do? This is really bad." And he looked at him and said, "This could be good or this could be bad. Who knows?" The next day, his horse returned with another horse. So instead of having no horses, he now has two horses. And the villagers all came around him and said, "Wow, this is fantastic. What a stroke of luck. You had no horse yesterday, and now you have two horses. Boy, you are successful." And he said, "This could be good or this could be bad. Who knows?" So with the new horse, it appeared that that new horse had never been broken. So the farmer had a son, and that son decided to ride the new horse. And while he was riding the horse threw him off and he broke his leg. And he was bedridden. And the villagers gathered around him and said, "Oh, what a bad stroke of luck. You know, tough deal. This is very, very bad." And the farmer said, "This could be good or this could be bad. Who knows?" The next day, the Chinese army came, knocked on the farmer's door, and said, "We're recruiting all able young men to serve in the military. We heard you have a son." And he turned around, his son was in bed with a broken leg, and said, "He can't come to serve. I'm sorry." And the villager said, "This is so great. He gets to stay at home." And he said, "This could be good or this could be bad. Who knows?" So in any given day, we're only having experiences. It might look successful at one point, or it might look tragic on the other point. We're just going through our experiences without judging them. So, I don't really focus on success and I don't really focus on failure. I focus on knowing who I am and what I'm capable of and what I can create in any given moment without judging myself. Certainly some situations are tougher than others, but I think about those immigrants that came over to America that couldn't even afford to come over as regular travelers. They had to come over with the cows in steerage. And how inventive and how they created something from nothing. And I really think having the faith with a higher power and being connected to that, you always have that ability to let go of what is and always create something new.
So is that what gave you the courage to make that transition from corporate America into your work that you do now?
Yeah, it's the faith. The faith that, well, I talked about you earlier, what is it that I value? What are my gifts? I'm a great listener. I like people. I'm genuinely interested in most people. I find them fascinating. And I asked, how can these gifts and these interests and my values be used in the world? And that's how I made that transition. I never look back.
And so let me ask then, and what part did love play in that?
Um, I have to say that I really loved myself and believed in myself.
So you had self-love.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite topics too, self-leadership and self-love. So advice would you give to the listeners on how to love themselves?
Well, I would really encourage them to get into some self-exploration. You and I, we met in a course run by Jack Canfield, you know. It was all about, self-esteem and who you are and self-exploration. Whether that's offered through your religious establishment or whether you go off and look at, a Joe Dispenza course, a Jack Canfield course, anything that um, prompts you to find out who you are, what your skills are, and to really love yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think a lot of people, I had a conversation with somebody recently. A lot of people want the result, but don't want to do the work to get the result, right? And self-love and self-leadership is something that you really have to work on every day. And you've taught me this over time, right? The power of a spiritual practice is the fact that it happens every day. And so I think that the power to become a leader that loves yourself is really a daily practice. It's something that you have to do every day because, to your point, there's ups and downs, and on those down days, it's really easy to go back to the old victim version and start kicking yourself, right, or blaming the rest of the world. And
Which is a misplaced use of your creative energy.
say that again, because that's a golden nugget. Say that again, please.
It's a misplaced use of your creative energy.
Right. So could you say more about that for the audience understands?
Well, there's always a solution. There's a spiritual solution to anything, you know, that's happening. Nothing happens. There's never a period at the end of any situation. Okay. So think about situations in your life that have been really, really devastating. They were difficult and you hopefully found your way through it. And as you went into these dark times, you learned things about yourself that maybe you didn't know. Man, I'm a really courageous person. Man, I'm a really inventive person. I never knew that I had the backbone or the understanding to get through something like this. And because of this situation, I have gone on to do X, Y, and Z. You know, everything hones us, everything makes us. The universe and our experiences are making us the person we want to be. It's just how much resistance we have to it.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I think you and I have had these conversations over the years. I think it's incredible because without the hardship and the challenges, we truly wouldn't be who we are today. And when we look back on it, at every hardship or challenge, there's a lesson that's available for us to learn from what went on or how it transpired for us to grow into a better person. I think one of the things that you've modeled for me over the years is the courage to continue to press that and push the boundary of where I'm comfortable and get out of that. Again, and you said something very powerful, to be able to create in the space of love and light for positive things instead of going back to the same old self-talk that's negative, because even in there we're creating.
Yeah, so it all comes down to self-love. That's it. There's a lot of focus on the outer world. And, I need to be loving with Louie. I need to be loving with my employees. Of course you do. But if you loved yourself and respected yourself, you wouldn't even have to think about being loving with other people because you love yourself enough. You feel full and abundant enough that love just flows freely to other people. It's not an effort. It all starts with the self. how you see yourself, how you feel about yourself, how you see yourself as part of creation, as the created, as the creator. You know, if you see yourself as the betrayed, the victim, the pushed down, the not good enough, how are you ever going to muster up any love to give to anybody else? And people say, I often hear this. I can love my uh, family or I can love other people, but I have difficulty loving myself. And I will challenge that what you're really offering people is true love, true unconditional love. You are a people pleaser, possibly, or you're manipulating people. But if you have true unconditional love, it should always flow from the self because that is the source of all unconditional love. So I would start with myself. If I don't love myself, or if I'm struggling with self esteem, I would look at why. Start there. What makes you think that you're defective?
What practices would you give for people to start with when they get to that point to kind of turn the magnifying glass on themselves and not the rest of the world? What advice would you give them to start to learn how to self-love and self-appreciate and stop judging themselves?
Well, we live in a great time now because there's a lot of focus on this self awareness and self love. Um, there's a lot of resources out there. There's Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about presence and living in the now and the self. Deepak Chopra talks a lot about it. Um, there's a lot of stuff out there you can look at. Some of it is religious based, but not necessarily all of it. Um, but I would focus on those. I would say stay away from structures that focus mainly on affirmation and success and pushing. I feel that, you know, dynamics where you think about something and focus on something and focus on something and you get it. I don't think that is a loving dynamic for yourself. I think that's an obsession dynamic for yourself. And I think that promotes attachment. And when we're attached to something, that means that we're going to have difficulty when those things change in our life. I think that you should look at a system that works on the development and trust and love for the self. And from that, everything else will go smoothly. Even if you become a prisoner of war, and we've had a lot of books and talks from people that have experienced that, and those that have survived that were people that went through extreme hardship, and their physical being, in many cases, were threatened through torture or deprivation. But they said somewhere within themselves, you can take my body, but you will never own my mind because my mind belongs to me and I know who I am. And so, with that mindset, that's how we begin to create the world. That's how we begin to rely on ourselves. Yes, we have relationships with partners and friends and mentors, but as those relationships change, which they will as life goes on, we always know who we are. The definition of who we are never changes.
Yeah, that's very powerful and it's profound wisdom. And I think that that's one of those things that as a leader and somebody that wants to lead with love, you have to be open to the realization that nothing ever stays the same, right?
Right,
It's constantly in the flow. Everything's constantly in the flow of changing. And through your help and wisdom, I've come to understand the only thing that's constant is love.
right.
Everything else is going to change. The love that's here for all of us is constant and the truth, and it never goes away. But everything else is going to change. Your employees, your body, sales this week versus last week, everything's in a flux.
Right. It may be good, it may be bad, who knows? Just like the farmer, right?
Right.
So, Jimmy Carter just passed away. the President of the United States at one point when I was in high school. And, we could talk about him politically and say, you could judge. You could say, he wasn't a very good political leader. He wasn't a really dynamic president. And people have very strong opinions about that. And, when he ran for president again, he was defeated, just run over. Okay. And he was heartbroken. He felt like he had failed the people of the United States. And he struggled. He and his wife both struggled when they went back to Plains, Georgia. But then he had a revelation. And he said, maybe I wasn't ever meant to be continually the president of the United States. Maybe I became the president of the United States so I could do something that I was meant to do. And he sat down and he thought about his gifts and his values and his interests, and he created a humanitarian effort that only he could do as an ex-president. So being the president of the United States wasn't the goal. The goal was to do the work that he was meant to do after becoming the president. So we never know what the goal is.
Yeah, that's fascinating, especially when you connect that to your sense and your definition of what success is, right? Because in Jimmy Carter's mind, initially, he thought that he had failed because he wasn't elected for a second term. When in truth, it was just opening the door and showing him the path to what he really was meant to be doing.
Right. And using his gifts, which he did phenomenally. But
Right.
also, you have to understand that the definition of success is very subjective. It's very subjective. If we were to go to Alaska and visit with the Inuit tribe there and look at the tribesmen and say what success is, you probably wouldn't meet our definition of success, right?
Right.
Our general definition of success. It would meet my definition of success because possibly the guy would say, um, having a very good relationship with my family, having a good relationship with my community, having enough so I can share with everyone around me. That isn't what we have been trained. We've been trained to get the grade, to get the money, to get the status, and none of that has to do with love.
Right. And it also it's very much that the me generation mentality, right? Me, 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 me. My job, my success, my money, my house, my car. And I think that what I've come to understand is people chase that golden ring to the point of so much suffering because there's no love in that. Because where's the end? Where's the end game? Because and this is what we're seeing in corporate America. It's one of the things that motivated me to do this was corporate America. But corporate America is never happy. If they make $10 billion this year, actually not even it's not by years anymore. They the shareholders want to see it not even quarterly. They want to see it at the end of 30 days. They want to see more profit than the last 30 days.
Yeah, but I take that responsibility back to myself because, you know, if we have a 401k or if we have an IRA, we're invested in stocks, okay, in mutual funds. We're corporate shareholders and we're demanding the returns. So to point out there and say, you corporate people, you're the bad guy. I got to look at the other three fingers pointing at myself saying, but I'm the stockholder, really. I want the returns in my retirement account. I want my 401k. I want my IRA. I want my interest at the bank. So it's really me ultimately driving the corporation.
Well, that's profound. That's really, really profound. And that's a great example of showing how everything's connected to everything, right? Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
I'm glad that we've had this conversation and hopefully we haven't freaked anybody out there.
No, I don't think so at all. I think it was very powerful. And I think you always have great wisdom. I always enjoy our conversations, and it's always enlightening because I love that you see the world from a different point of view and the connectedness of it and how we're supposed to be living our lives. And I'm truly grateful for that. is if people want to get in touch with you or reach out to you, what's the best way to do that, Lori?
I have a website, and it's www.laurettedejulian.com. And I do mentorship and spiritual direction. And I'm also a death doula. So I help people begin their journey of transition. So, and that has helped too, because I see how successful people end their lives and what they get to take with them and what has been the most meaningful for them.
I'm sure
Gives you
that.
a new perspective on life.
So, so, so now I can't let you go now. So, what have you discovered? What's the most meaningful thing they're taking with them? These successful people that end up dying.
The experiences, the experiences that have enriched their life, the people that have loved them. Um, Unfortunately, some of them have to take some guilt and shame and regret with them. And, it's difficult to die with regrets. I think that's the hardest thing. People think it's physical pain, but I really think it's emotional pain of, I wish I would have done it differently. And what it comes down to is those people never allowed themselves to be the people they wanted to be in situations.
Gotcha. Yeah, they were busy being successful and not who they really should have been.
Or they were busy being fearful. I would say that fear motivates most people and makes them do things out of character.
Gotcha. Anything else you'd like to add now before we close?
No, but thank you. Thank you for letting me be here.
Well, and thank you very much for taking the time. I'm really humbled and honored. And for your listeners, I'm also going to put her contact information in the notes in the podcast. So please go to her website and reach out. She's truly a wealth of wisdom and information. And I can tell you that from personal experience, she can help you get through whatever emotional struggles, baggage you may be carrying, and get you to a place that's better and easier and more fun, most importantly, more loving than you could ever imagine. I think you're just one of the most amazing people that's ever crossed paths in my life. And thank you again for taking the time, Lori. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks again for joining us and listening to this episode of Leadership and Love. I would like to challenge you to ask yourself, what's one thing that you heard today that you can implement immediately to improve your leadership and accelerate your growth? If you've gotten value out of this episode or learned something that you can implement today, we'd ask that you please share it with those that you care about. Our goal is to create more leaders who are leading with love.